Behind the dazzling lights of Hollywood lies a truth few dare to talk about. These stars didn't just chase fame, they fought silent battles with identity, fear, and rejection. What if everything the world believed about them was only half the story? Today we uncover the shocking emotional journeys of celebrities who cross gender boundaries, stories of courage, pain, and transformation that will completely change the way you see fame. Fallon Fox, the fighter who refused to be defined. Before the spotlight, before the roaring crowd, Fallon Fox was fighting a far more brutal battle, one that had nothing to do with fists or cages. Growing up in a world that demanded rigid definitions, Fallon felt like a stranger in her own skin. Every mirror was a confrontation, every day a quiet war between who she was and who she was expected to be. When she finally spoke her truth, the response was not applause, but rejection, confusion, and a painful isolation that cut deeper than any physical blow. But Fallon did not retreat. She transformed. Her transition was not just a physical journey, it was an act of defiance. Without the full support of her family, without a safety net, she chose authenticity over comfort and truth over fear. When she stepped back into the world, she did not walk cautiously, she charged forward, determined to claim her place in one of the most unforgiving arenas imaginable, mixed martial arts. Inside the cage, Fallon Fox became history, the first openly transgender fighter in MMA. But with that milestone came a storm. Critics questioned her right to compete, her body, her identity. The noise was relentless and often cruel. Yet Fallon stood her ground, absorbing every word like a seasoned fighter takes hits steady, unbroken, unyielding. Because for her, this fight was never just about winning matches. It was about proving existence, dignity, and the right to be seen. Fallon Fox's story is not just about combat, it is about courage under fire. In a world eager to judge, she chose to stand, to fight, and to be unapologetically herself. And sometimes that is the most powerful victory of all. Chanel West Coast, the rumor that would not die. In the age of the internet where speculation spreads faster than truth, Chanel West Coast found herself at the center of one of the strangest rumors in pop culture. Whispers claim she was once Lee Norris, the actor known for playing the awkward yet lovable Stuart Minkus. At first glance, the resemblance seemed just convincing enough to ignite curiosity, but what followed was a wildfire of misinformation that refused to fade. For Chanel, this was not just gossip, it was a distortion of identity. While she built her career through charisma, music, and television, the noise of the rumor threatened to overshadow her achievements. People were no longer just seeing her as an artist, they were questioning her existence, turning her life into a spectacle. And in a world already complicated by conversations about gender and identity, this kind of narrative blurred the line between reality and careless entertainment. Yet Chanel did not lash out. She responded with composure, clarity, and an unexpected layer of empathy. Rather than simply denying the rumor, she addressed the deeper issue, reminding people that being transgender is not a punchline or a conspiracy theory. It is a deeply personal journey, one that deserves respect, not ridicule. Her response revealed not just intelligence, but emotional awareness in a culture that often lacks both. In the end, Chanel West Coast proved something far more powerful than any rumor could take away. She showed that identity is not defined by whispers or viral myths, but by the strength to stand firm in your truth. And sometimes the real battle is not correcting the world, but refusing to let it rewrite who you are. Jazz Jennings. Jazz Jennings didn't wait for adulthood to discover who she was, she knew it as a child with a clarity that most people spend a lifetime searching for. At just 6 years old, she stood in front of the world and said something powerful and undeniable: she was a girl. In a society that often dismisses or questions such certainty, especially from someone so young, Jazz's truth became both her strength and her greatest challenge. What makes her story extraordinary is not just her identity, but the way she lived it out loud. While many struggle in silence, Jazz grew up under public attention, documenting every step of her journey from childhood confusion to teenage self-discovery. Cameras followed her, but they never defined her. Instead, she used that visibility to tell a story rarely seen: a transgender life unfolding in real time, raw, honest, and unapologetically real. But visibility comes with a price. As she grew older, Jazz faced intense scrutiny from strangers who felt entitled to judge her body, her choices, and her future. Every milestone became a public debate, every decision questioned by people who would never understand the weight she carried. Yet through it all, Jazz remained grounded, holding on to one belief that became her anchor: the only opinion that truly matters is her own. Jazz Jennings is more than a television personality or activist. She is a symbol of fearless authenticity in a world that constantly demands explanation. Her journey is not just about growing up transgender, it is about growing up brave, choosing self-acceptance over approval, and proving that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that comes from within. Should a child be allowed to make life-defining decisions about identity so early? Or is Jazz proof that knowing who you are does not depend on age at all? Laverne Cox, the voice that refused to be silenced. Before the red carpets, before the awards, Laverne Cox was a child trying to survive in a world that made her feel wrong for simply existing. Growing up in the Deep South, where expectations were strict and differences were not welcomed, she quickly learned that being herself came at a cost. The teasing, the bullying, the constant pressure to conform slowly built into something darker, a silence so heavy it nearly consumed her. There was a moment when that silence almost won, but Laverne chose to live. Her journey was not a straight line to success, it was a series of painful steps towards self-acceptance. Leaving behind the environment that tried to confine her, she moved to New York, chasing something more than just a career. She was chasing freedom. Transitioning was not just about changing her body, it was about reclaiming her voice, her identity, her right to exist without apology. Then came the breakthrough. On Orange is the New Black, Laverne did more than act, she revealed a truth rarely seen on screen. Her character was not a stereotype, but a reflection of real struggles, real humanity. Audiences did not just watch her, they felt her. And in that moment, Laverne Cox became more than an actress. She became a symbol, a force, a voice for millions who had been ignored for far too long. Laverne's story is not just about rising to fame, it is about rising from pain. In a world that tried to silence her, she chose to speak louder. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to disappear. Chaz Bono, the son who had to become himself. Born into the glare of fame, Chaz Bono's life was never his own to begin with. As the child of Sonny and Cher, he was introduced to the world as chastity, a symbol of innocence shaped by public expectation. Cameras adored him, audiences accepted him, but deep beneath that polished image lived a quiet discomfort that never faded. It was not rebellion, not confusion, but a persistent feeling that something was fundamentally misaligned. While the world saw certainty, Chaz felt distance from the identity he was expected to embody. For years, he tried to live within that role, hoping it might eventually feel real. He adapted, performed, and carried the weight of a life designed by others. But truth has a way of resurfacing. The longer he suppressed it, the heavier it became, turning into a silent pressure that affected every part of his existence. This was not just about identity, it was about survival, about waking up each day in a reality that did not belong to him. And the cost of continuing that life grew too high to ignore. Choosing to transition was not an act of impulse, it was an act of courage built over decades of internal conflict. Chaz stepped into the unknown fully aware of the scrutiny, the judgment, and the risk of losing acceptance from those closest to him. Through hormone therapy surgery and intense public attention, he endured a transformation that demanded both physical and emotional resilience. Every step forward required him to confront not only the world, but also the echoes of who he used to be. Chaz Bono stands not as a reinvention, but as a revelation. His journey is not defined by what he changed, but by what he finally allowed himself to become. In a world that often resists difference, his story is a powerful reminder that authenticity is not given, it is fought for, claimed, and ultimately lived. Carmen Carrera, the beauty who redefined her truth. Before the world saw her as a woman, Carmen Carrera was known for something else entirely, a dazzling presence on RuPaul's Drag Race. She commanded attention with confidence, glamour, and a performance style that blurred the line between illusion and identity. But behind the makeup and stage lights, there was a deeper truth waiting to surface. What began as performance was never just performance for Carmen, it was a reflection of who she truly was. Stepping away from the drag stage, Carmen made a decision that would change everything. She chose to transition not for attention, not for headlines, but for herself. And that is when the real battle began. Many who once celebrated her suddenly questioned her. To some, she was no longer authentic in either world, not fully accepted as a drag performer, yet not fully understood as a transgender woman. The admiration turned into confusion, even criticism forcing Carmen to stand alone in a space few truly understood. But Carmen did not retreat into silence. She spoke out, challenging misconceptions, calling for respect, and demanding that people see beyond labels. Her voice carried weight because it came from experience, from pain, from truth. She refused to let others define her narrative, even when it meant facing backlash from the very community that once embraced her. That courage transformed her from a performer into something far more powerful, a voice for change. Today, Carmen Carrera stands as more than beauty or fame. She represents evolution, the courage to outgrow expectations, and the strength to redefine identity on her own terms. Her journey is not about leaving one world behind, but about creating a new space where she no longer has to pretend, only exist as who she truly is. Gina Rosero, the secret she refused to hide anymore. For years, Gina Rosero lived a life that looked effortless from the outside. She was a successful model moving through an industry obsessed with perfection, where every detail was curated and every flaw carefully hidden. She fit the image, she played the role, and she did it flawlessly. But behind that polished exterior was a truth she carried in silence, a truth that had the power to undo everything she had built. Each success came with an invisible weight, a quiet fear that one day everything could collapse. Silence, however, has a limit. In 2014, standing under the bright lights of a TED stage, Gina made a decision that would redefine her entire life. She chose honesty. Not partially, not carefully, but completely. In front of the world, she revealed that she was transgender, a reality she had hidden for years, even from people within her own circle. It was not just a revelation, it was a risk that could have cost her career, her identity, and the fragile acceptance she had worked so hard to maintain. But truth did not destroy her life, it liberated it. What followed was not loss, but expansion. The fear that once controlled her began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of purpose far greater than personal success. Gina was no longer just a model navigating the surface of beauty, she became a voice challenging the very standards that once confined her. Her story reached people far beyond the fashion world, offering visibility, courage, and a reflection many had never seen before. Gina Rosero's journey is not defined by the secret she revealed, but by the freedom she claimed. In choosing to be seen, she did more than change her own life, she helped others believe they could do the same. Caitlyn Jenner, the legend who chose to begin again. For decades, the world knew Caitlyn Jenner as Bruce Jenner, an Olympic hero, a symbol of strength, discipline, and victory. Standing on the global stage after winning gold in 1976, she represented the pinnacle of success, admired, celebrated, and seemingly complete. But behind the medals and the image of perfection was a truth that refused to stay buried. Even at the height of fame, there was a quiet, persistent struggle that no achievement could silence. Living a double life came at a cost. For years, Caitlyn carried an identity she could not fully express, balancing public admiration with private conflict. She built a family, became a father, a husband, a television personality, all while suppressing a part of herself that never disappeared. The pressure was constant, the fear of rejection real, especially in a world that was far less accepting than it is today. Success gave her visibility, but not peace. Then came the moment that changed everything. At the age of 65, when most people settle into the life they have built, Caitlyn chose to start over. She stepped into the light not as the person the world had always known, but as who she truly was. Her public transition was not just personal, it became global, sparking conversations, debates, and a wave of attention that was impossible to ignore. It was bold, controversial, and deeply human all at once. Caitlyn Jenner's journey is not about leaving a life behind, but about finally stepping into one that was always waiting. In choosing authenticity over comfort, she proved that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be, even if the whole world is watching. But here's the question that continues to divide opinions. Should personal truth always outweigh social expectations and family impact, or are there moments when becoming yourself comes at a cost too great to justify? Lee Norris, the truth behind the internet illusion. In a digital world where rumors spread faster than facts, Lee Norris found himself pulled into a narrative he never chose. Known for his role as the quirky and intelligent Stuart Minkus, he built a steady career through talent and consistency. Yet years later, a bizarre theory began circulating online, claiming that he had disappeared and somehow become Chanel West Coast. What started as speculation quickly turned into a widely shared illusion. The resemblance may have sparked curiosity, but the story had no truth. For Lee Norris, this was not just an odd rumor, it was a strange distortion of identity in an era where reality can be easily rewritten by the internet. While he continued working in television and film, appearing in projects like The Walking Dead and other productions, the noise of the rumor lingered in the background. It created confusion, distracted from his work, and reduced years of effort into a misleading narrative that had nothing to do with who he actually is. What makes this situation more revealing is not the rumor itself, but how easily people accepted it. In a time where conversations about identity are more visible than ever, the line between genuine personal journeys and internet fiction has become dangerously thin. Real stories of transformation deserve understanding, not to be mixed with baseless speculation for entertainment. Lee Norris remains exactly who he has always been, an actor dedicated to his craft, navigating an industry that constantly evolves. His story is not about transformation, but about clarity, a reminder that not everything viral is real and not every narrative deserves to be believed. Andrea Pejich, the beauty who broke every boundary. Before the world fully understood her, Andrea Pejich was already redefining it. With striking features and an almost otherworldly presence, she rose quickly in the fashion industry, captivating designers and audiences alike. What made her different was not just her beauty, but her ability to exist between worlds, walking both menswear and womenswear runways with equal power. She became a symbol of androgyny, a face that challenged everything people thought they knew about gender and identity. But success did not silence the truth within her. Behind the cameras and flashing lights was a quiet realization that could no longer be ignored. Andrea was not living between genders, she knew exactly who she was. The industry celebrated her uniqueness, but that celebration did not replace the need for authenticity. Modeling in both roles may have brought fame, but it could not fill the gap between her outer image and her inner identity. And eventually that gap became impossible to carry. In 2014, Andrea made a decision that would change not only her life, but the fashion world itself. She transitioned openly, stepping forward not as a concept or a symbol, but as a woman fully claiming her truth. It was a risk in an industry known for its rigid standards, but instead of fading away, she rose even higher. Becoming one of the first transgender models to achieve global recognition, she proved that authenticity is not a limitation, it is power. Andrea Pejich's journey is not about fitting into a category, it is about breaking the need for one. She did not just transform herself, she transformed perception, showing the world that identity is not something to be defined by others, but something to be owned without fear. Elliot Page, the moment he chose to finally exist. For years, Elliot Page was celebrated as one of Hollywood's most captivating talents. From breakout roles to award-winning performances, he built a career that many could only dream of. On screen, he was fearless, emotionally raw, and undeniably real. But behind the applause and recognition was a quiet truth he could not escape. No matter how successful he became, there was always a distance between who the world saw and who he truly was. That distance slowly became unbearable. Living under an identity that did not belong to him was not just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. Every red carpet, every interview, every role came with an invisible pressure to maintain an image that felt increasingly disconnected. The more visible he became, the more invisible he felt within himself. It was a contradiction that fame could not fix, a silence that success could not drown out. Then in 2020, everything changed. Elliot stepped forward and told the world the truth. Not carefully, not halfway, but with a clarity that cut through years of silence. He came out as transgender not as a reinvention, but as a revelation. It was a moment that carried risk, vulnerability, and undeniable courage. Because in an industry built on perception, choosing authenticity meant stepping into uncertainty with no guarantees of acceptance. What followed was not a fall, but a transformation. Elliot Page did not disappear. He became more present than ever before. His voice grew stronger, his presence more grounded, his identity finally aligned with the person he had always been. His journey is not about changing who he was, but about finally allowing himself to exist without compromise. And in doing so, he gave millions of people something far more powerful than a performance. He gave them truth. Hunter Schafer, the girl who turned truth into power. Before the spotlight ever found her, Hunter Schafer was already fighting to be seen. Growing up in a world that tried to simplify identity into fixed boxes, she refused to shrink herself to fit. From a young age, she understood that who she was could not be defined by expectations. But understanding yourself is one thing, standing in that truth while the world questions you is something else entirely. And Hunter chose to stand. Her transition was not just personal, it was public, political, and deeply emotional. She faced systems that resisted her, voices that doubted her, and a society still learning how to understand stories like hers. But instead of retreating, she pushed forward using art, fashion, and her own presence as a way to express what words often could not. Every step she took became a statement, not loud but undeniable. Then came the breakthrough that changed everything. In Euphoria, Hunter did more than play a character. She embodied a reality that had rarely been shown with such honesty. Her performance was not just acting, it was lived experience, raw, vulnerable, and deeply human. Audiences did not just watch her, they connected with her. And in that connection, something shifted. Representation was no longer abstract, it became real, emotional, and impossible to ignore. Hunter Schafer's story is not about fitting into the world, it is about reshaping it. She did not wait for acceptance, she created space. And in doing so, she proved that identity is not something to be explained, it is something to be lived fully and without apology. Buck Angel, the man who redefined what strength looks like. Before the world had the language to understand him, Buck Angel was already living a truth that challenged everything society believed about gender. Born into a body that never felt like home, he spent years navigating confusion, rejection, and a deep internal conflict that shaped his early life. It was not just about identity, it was about survival in a world that offered no clear path for someone like him. But Buck did not wait for permission to exist. His transition was not quiet, and it was never meant to be. With unapologetic confidence, he stepped into his identity as a man and refused to hide any part of his story. Where others might have chosen safety, Buck chose visibility. He embraced his body, his past, and his truth with a boldness that forced people to confront their own assumptions. He did not fit into traditional definitions of masculinity, and that was exactly the point. What made Buck different was not just his journey, but the way he owned it. Through his presence, his work, and his voice, he challenged deeply rooted ideas about what it means to be a man. Strength for Buck was not about fitting into expectations, it was about breaking them. He turned discomfort into conversation and controversy into awareness, becoming a figure that people could not ignore even when they did not understand him. Buck Angel's story is not about blending in, it is about standing fully exposed in your truth. In a world that often demands simplicity, he represents complexity, courage, and a new definition of identity that refuses to be boxed in or rewritten by anyone else. Kim Petras, the voice that refused to be silenced. Long before the charts, the fame, and the flashing lights, Kim Petras was already fighting for something far more important than success. She knew who she was at an age when most people are still trying to understand themselves. While the world questioned, doubted, and watched closely, Kim made a decision that would define her life. She chose to live her truth no matter how early, no matter how difficult, but knowing who you are does not make the journey easier. Transitioning at a young age placed her under intense public scrutiny. Media attention followed her every step, turning her personal life into headlines before she even had the chance to fully grow into herself. There were expectations, pressures, and constant reminders that she was different. Yet instead of breaking under that weight, Kim turned it into fuel. She refused to be reduced to a story. She wanted to become a voice, and that voice would not be ignored. Breaking into the music industry was never guaranteed. Talent alone was not enough, especially when the world seemed more interested in her identity than her artistry. But Kim persisted. Song after song, she carved out her place, building a career defined not by labels but by sound, energy, and undeniable presence. When success finally came, it was not handed to her, it was earned through resilience. Kim Petras is not just a transgender artist, she is a force that proves identity does not limit greatness. If anything, it sharpens it. Her journey is not about overcoming who she is, but about turning it into power and making the world listen. Isis King, the woman who walked so others could run. Before the fashion industry began talking about diversity and inclusion, Isis King was already stepping into spaces that were never designed for her. She did not arrive with loud declarations or controversy, but with quiet determination and undeniable presence. As one of the first openly transgender contestants on America's Next Top Model, she entered a world that had long operated on rigid standards of beauty, where difference was often excluded rather than celebrated. But Isis was not there to fit in. Her journey to that stage was shaped by struggle, rejection, and moments where giving up would have been easier than continuing forward. Being seen meant being judged not just for her talent, but for who she was. Every step she took carried pressure, the weight of representation, and the fear of being reduced to something she never chose to be defined by. Yet through it all, she remained composed, grounded, and unwavering in her sense of self. What made Isis powerful was not just her identity, but her presence. She did not demand attention, she commanded it naturally. With every walk, every appearance, she challenged the industry without saying a word. Her existence alone became a statement, forcing people to confront their own biases and expand their understanding of beauty. Opportunities did not come easily, but she earned each one, slowly building a path that had never existed before her. Isis King's story is not about sudden transformation, it is about persistence. It is about showing up again and again in spaces that were not ready until they had no choice but to change. She did not just open doors for herself, she made it possible for others to walk through them with less fear. And sometimes that quiet kind of courage is the one that changes everything. Is true progress achieved by quietly proving your worth over time, or does real change only happen when people are loud enough to force the world to listen? Fallon Fox, the fighter who refused to be defined. Before the spotlight, before the roaring crowd, Fallon Fox was fighting a far more brutal battle, one that had nothing to do with fists or cages. Growing up in a world that demanded rigid definitions, Fallon felt like a stranger in her own skin. Every mirror was a confrontation, every day a quiet war between who she was and who she was expected to be. When she finally spoke her truth, the response was not applause, but rejection, confusion, and a painful isolation that cut deeper than any physical blow. But Fallon did not retreat. She transformed. Her transition was not just a physical journey, it was an act of defiance. Without the full support of her family, without a safety net, she chose authenticity over comfort and truth over fear. When she stepped back into the world, she did not walk cautiously, she charged forward, determined to claim her place in one of the most unforgiving arenas imaginable, mixed martial arts. Inside the cage, Fallon Fox became history, the first openly transgender fighter in MMA. But with that milestone came a storm. Critics questioned her right to compete, her body, her identity. The noise was relentless and often cruel. Yet Fallon stood her ground, absorbing every word like a seasoned fighter takes hits steady, unbroken, unyielding. Because for her, this fight was never just about winning matches. It was about proving existence, dignity, and the right to be seen. Fallon Fox's story is not just about combat, it is about courage under fire. In a world eager to judge, she chose to stand, to fight, and to be unapologetically herself. And sometimes that is the most powerful victory of all.